AH Datalytics' Jeff Asher on the incredible nationwide decline in murder. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast.
No, the devil's got no hold on me.
All right, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm also a CNN contributor and the founder of thereload.com, where you can head over today and sign up for a free newsletter, a free weekly newsletter, if you want to keep up to date with what's going on with guns in America from a sober, serious perspective that focuses on hard news and analysis. This week, we are talking about, I think, one of the biggest stories in the country that it doesn't get treated that way, which is the dramatic decline in the murder and overall crime rate that we've seen going now for several years. And to do that, we have back with us Jeff Asher. Welcome to the show, Jeff. Thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
And you run a data analytics firm called AH Datalytics that follows real-time crime reporting and analyzes that to give us fast insight into what's going on with crime in the country, right?
Yes. We do data analytics largely for criminal justice type agencies, advocacy groups, things like that. We have a grant supported by Arnold Ventures to run the real-time crime index. So we built it from scratch and are working on expanding it now. We just launched a YouTube channel yesterday, 2 days ago, called Aggregated. So Aggregated RTCI on YouTube. If you want to check that out, we have our first video up, and hopefully just providing, short 3 to 5 minute videos every couple of weeks on crime data, crime trends, interesting things. And I have a vision of us doing like a Billy on the Street type thing where we run through and give people $1 if they can answer questions about crime data or trends. So hopefully it'll also be fun. And yeah, so that's great. And working on both evaluating and then communicating the trends that we see.
Yes, and so you have a recent piece on a Substack, which you also have as part of your operations, that details the mid-year update for our crime statistics. We had you on the show a few months back, and I wanted to bring you back on to do this update because, again, I think it's one of the biggest stories out there. What are the top line findings that you're seeing?
Everything's down. Is I guess the easiest way. Sometimes there's a lot of blah blah blah, or this is down but this is up, or it's driven by a small change in cities of a certain size. Now we're seeing generally murder is down almost everywhere. Not everywhere, but almost everywhere. We're seeing a large drop in violent crime and a large drop in property crime. One of the issues, obviously, one of the issues is that not every crime is reported to police. We have a good sense that the murders are successfully reported. We have a decent sense that auto theft is generally reported. Everything else has varying degrees of pretty high levels of underreporting. So we think we're capturing the trend. We don't think we're capturing exactly what the top line number is. The other issue is that agencies still have it's July now, so agencies have until next April to submit final data. So we know that what we have now is an undercount. We don't think it's a huge undercount, but we do think it's an undercount. It's probably, for most crimes, especially property crime, about a 1.5% undercount. So if an agency reports 100 crimes in a month, it's probably about 101.
Yeah, and I want to we'll definitely get in more into how you guys collect this data and sort of the differences between what you're doing and what the FBI does, for instance, in a minute. But I just want to focus on the top line stuff to get started here. Like, so you're saying that one, you believe that you have really good data on murder and car thefts, which were two of the biggest stories during the pandemic, right? Or during 2020, 2021, we had massive increases in the rates of both of those very serious crimes. And now we're seeing massive drops in both of those. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, murder peaked sometime at the end of 2022. In 2023, had the largest one-year decline ever recorded. In 2024, had the largest one-year decline ever recorded. Likely, we don't have the FBI's 2024 numbers yet. And 2025, we're seeing the largest one-year decline ever recorded. So an even larger decline than what we saw last year in our sample.
And that's remarkable, right? I mean, that's
Yeah,
not a
it
normal thing
is.
to happen.
No, I mean, no, it's very not normal to have the largest anything. And usually murder goes up a couple percentage points, it goes down a couple percentage points. The largest previous one-year decline was a 9% decline in 1996. The largest in terms of the number of fewer murder victims was about 1,800. And so 2023, we had more than 2,000 fewer victims than 2022. 2024, we likely had probably 2,500 or so fewer victims than we had in 2023. And now we're on track for about right around that 2,000 mark again, fewer victims. So it's not just, oh, the number is lower, so the percentage is higher. We're legitimately seeing record levels, percentage points, and record levels of fewer victims.
And in a lot of these cities that you track, and we'll get more into the city level data in a moment, but in a lot of them, you're even seeing the raw numbers of murders below, historic levels, right?
Yeah, New Orleans, where I am, had the fewest murders since 1970 through June, which includes the 14 killed on January 1st on Bourbon Street. Um, San Francisco had the fewest that they've ever recorded, then monthly data back to 1960. Detroit, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Baltimore, all 1960s. The last time they had that many murders,
that's raw numbers.
that few murders.
Yeah, that's raw numbers. That's not percentage of per GDP, per 100,000 or whatever, which is crazy because some of these cities are much larger than they were in those years, right?
Yeah, not Detroit, Baltimore, New Orleans.
Yeah, some of them are smaller.
San Francisco and Los Angeles and Philadelphia are bigger.
So yeah, I mean, I'm always struck by, excuse me, I'm always struck by the enormity of that. It's just we've seen. I mean, first of all, we saw this huge increase, right? The increase we had in 2020 to 2021 to 2022 was one of the largest in history as far as murder rate goes, right? And then now we're seeing the exact opposite. Some of the most incredible declines, and it's not like a fluke. This has been happening several years in a row now, right? Is that a fair understanding of what's going on?
Yeah, we're on the third straight year, and so
it's accelerating. It's not like the improvements aren't slowing down. We're actually seeing even better results this year than last year, which was better than the year before.
Yeah, and part of that is, okay, as we get lower, if we have the same number fewer, we're seeing larger percentages, but we're also seeing, continued acceleration in the declines.
It's just wild to me because I don't think most people know this is going on. To be honest, and look, I think the public's perception of crime is always pretty disconnected from the reality of it, for probably a lot of different reasons. I'm sure we could do a whole podcast or a series of podcasts on why that is, but I don't get the impression that people have this understanding that murder rate is now at the lowest level. I think most people probably still perceive it as pretty bad, going back to the 2021 2022 levels. And
we only have annual polling really from Gallup that we get every year that really answers the public perception question. So it's not something that we necessarily know right now, and it won't be till November that we know whether or not the public is aware of it. I like to hope that they're at least a little bit aware of it, but don't really know at all.
I will say, and that's fair. Like, I'm just basing that on vibes, which is not the best way to get something off of. But, and I don't know if you look at some of those issue polling. I know, I think there was a recent poll from Pew, I believe, and crime is lower down the list of people's top concerns. So maybe they are perceiving it, but I don't see a lot of discussion of it in media. Certainly, occasionally when you put out a piece, there'll be some media coverage, but it's not like a top story of the year. That's for sure, at most media outlets. And I think that's, unfortunate. Then that's why I want to dedicate some time to it, because I do think this is a really significant story and one of the most undercovered stories out there. And so, to me, this crime trend of just huge decreases in murder, to the point where it seems like we're on track, right, to have the lowest murder rate perhaps in recorded history.
Yeah, so I wrote that in May, and it's hard. So we know what the 2023 estimate was from the FBI that they published last September, excuse me. We know that they have a tendency to revise it up, usually a couple of hundred, not a ton, but we know that it'll probably be revised when they release the 2024 numbers this fall. That number will be revised up a little bit. If you're conservative and you say, okay, RTCI had murder down about 14.5% in 2024. Let's be conservative and put that at 12% nationally. So you take where we were in 2023, you go 12% below that. You basically add the population, you say consistent population growth in 2024, consistent population growth in 2025. Then we figure out where we need to be for 2025 in order to have kind of that lowest murder rate ever. So 2024 was likely right around where it was in 2019. And we feel pretty good about that. We have that in the RTCI. We have that in the Gun Violence Archive. The CDC is just finishing up its preliminary count of 2024 homicides. They also are at roughly 2019's level. So if we assume that we're back to 2019 level in 2024, then we subtract another 10% from that, being very conservative. That puts us right at 2014 sort of historic low of around 4.5 per 100,000. So if the murder rate, if the change comes in at around 10%, we're probably going to be at the lowest ever recorded. Right now we're double that. So, and there are few historical precedents of that sort of dip turning into not staying stable through. If it's stable through June, it usually stays stable through the rest of the year. So the idea being that we feel decently confident that we're going to have the lowest murder rate. Well, I would decently confident is too confident. Feel it's highly plausible that we'll have the lowest murder rate ever recorded this year, which is fantastic. And we will, I think, have a better understanding of that once the FBI releases their 2024 data. Then we'll be able to say that with more confidence.
Yeah, but there gives, and obviously you want to have those caveats. Things could change. Maybe the data is a little bit off one way or the other. There's a lot of ifs that go into predicting the lowest crime rate ever, and we're only in June here. But as you just laid out, there are good reasons to think we could get there, which would be kind of a monumental thing. But speaking of the data, let's just get a little bit deeper into how this data collection works, for how your system works versus the FBI, and why you're confident in making these sorts of predictions, given how you collect the data. I mean, as you outline in your piece that you wrote, the FBI collects data from 18,000 police agencies across the country, right, to make their reports. And you guys use something like 400 agencies. So how can somebody looking at this data be confident that your numbers are going to align at the end of the day?
So it's 421 agencies, I think, in our last sample, which is 4%-ish, 4.5%, less than 4% of the national total. It's closer to 16,000 agencies that report every year, even though 18,000 participate. So we're about a quarter, let's say, or 4% of 2 to 4% of the national total. Don't podcast and try and do advanced math in your head. It's just not working. So
those agencies are some of the largest, right?
Yeah. So it's 102 million people. So it's a little less than a third of the nation's population. Let's call it
covered
30%.
By those agencies. Yeah.
And we know that crime is not concentrated equally. So each agency does not report 1/16,000th of the crime. So we're actually looking at 4%-ish of the agencies, 50% of the murders. And so we have an enormous sample of the murders that occur in a given year. And that means that historically it's been very predictive of what the national trends will look like once it actually comes out. And so, no, it's not going to be perfect, but a sample of this size should be within about 2 percentage points on average of the national change at the end of the year. So that's one point, that we know that the sample is sufficiently large to predict the national change. The other important point is that we know that as of this point of the year, with a sample of this size, it is usually quite predictive of the national trend. You have to be careful. Something like 2020, if you had data through May, it would not have predicted how large the rise in murder would be. Similarly, in 2021, if you only had data through May, you wouldn't have predicted just how many murders there were in 2021. So murder was much higher in 2021 through May, and then it sort of came down as the rest of 2020 caught up. So it's something that we have to be careful that there's still time for something to change, but there's not that much time for something to change. I mean, we've been on this same trend line for 2.5 years, or a little more than 2.5 years. It might change and might sort of revert to the mean, I guess you could say, but it probably won't. And so that gives confidence that just a historical look that we've got sufficient agencies to make it well.
Right. And the advantage of your system over the FBI is that it's real time, right? A lot of these big police departments that you collect data from, they're reporting, monthly, or even weekly, right? In some cases. Whereas the FBI doesn't report until like a year and a half out.
Yeah, and in about 80% of the agencies, we're getting data from the states themselves. So we're getting the exact data that they're going to send to the FBI. Some agencies send it to us themselves. Some agencies, we have to get it from their websites, which can sometimes be a little wonky. Some agencies, they'll have like their record management system published, and so we'll have to grab it from that, which again can be a little bit wonky, but generally is very accurate relative to the trends that are reported. So it for most agencies, it will mimic what the FBI is doing. The advantage is it's been 6 weeks since May ended, and we've already published our May numbers. We'll have mid-year numbers soon, and the FBI, the last official estimates they have is still from 2023. So there's a huge advantage there.
And so let's dive into some of those specific numbers from some of these cities. You mentioned a few of them earlier on in the show, but let's try to talk a little bit more. New Orleans, as you mentioned, the fewest number of murders through June 2025 any year since 1970. That was even with a terrorist attack that took the lives of several people. New York City, the only time they've ever seen a lower rate of murders, or the fewer murders, was once in 2017. Philadelphia, fewest murders since 1969. Los Angeles since 1966. Baltimore 65. Detroit 64. San Francisco ever. Right? That's pretty remarkable. What do you see? Are there any of those cities that stick out to you as far as these declines that we're seeing, or is it just kind of like
you took all the cities that stick out?
Okay.
No, I mean,
so why did those stick out? Just because they're at the the absolute lowest they've seen out of maybe 1 or 2 years?
They're historically doing excellent, but they're not alone. A lot of places that you saw rises. Charlotte down 23%. I'm just pulling up the list of cities. Baton Rouge, Louisiana down 23%. Nashville down 26%. Denver down 50% through May.
And that's just this year.
That's this year compared to last year. Let's see. Cleveland, I think we only have first quarter data, and they're showing a 30% decline. And then, you can go down and down the list. And yes, some cities are up. I think that's when you do this sort of exercise, the outliers are the ones that are seeing rises. Places like Boston, everybody talked about the Boston miracle last year and how few murders they had. I think fewest murders since 1957. Now they're seeing sort of more of a return to normal. So it looks like, oh my God, Boston's up 160%, but it's only because the last 6 months, the first 6 months of 2024 were so unbelievably incredible. And Now they've sort of returned much more to a normal level of violence in Boston, which is generally very, very small. Fort Worth, Texas has seen an increase, although that's starting to change. Houston, Texas also seeing a slight increase. San Diego seeing a slight increase. And that we're at the point where the places that are down 20 to 30% are the places that you're like, okay, those are the normal cities. And the places that are up 4 to 10% are the ones that you're thinking, oh, these are the outliers. And that's a good place to be from an analytic perspective.
Yeah, I mean, that's because even the ones that are having an increase, it's not a dramatic increase necessarily.
Yeah, and I don't know that. I think Fayetteville, North Carolina, is the only place seeing. They had 18 year to date through April. They didn't report May data, compared to 3 in 2024 through the first 4 months. So again, it's 4 months. It's a relatively small N. So I would expect that it sort of evens out as time goes on, but it is definitely higher than it definitely stands out as an outlier of an increase.
Okay. Yeah, I remember seeing there were a couple pieces from the Trace over the 4th of July weekend that looked at Chicago and Philadelphia, and in Chicago, things were in line with what we're seeing here, where they had a relatively good holiday weekend with few shootings, whereas in Philadelphia, the trend, they were worried that maybe the trend was going to reverse the downward trend, and things were on a negative pathway. Because I mean, there was even a viral video of a shootout that had happened in the city, with a bunch of people on a porch and shooting, chaotic scene. But it doesn't sound like that. Philadelphia has actually reversed the trend here. It's still going down overall, and maybe this was just one incident which I do think kind of goes back to the conversation of how crime gets covered. Oftentimes, you'll see like that shootout in Philadelphia got a lot of attention, but it sounds like Philadelphia's murder trend is still on track to be a very good year for the city.
Yeah, I'm just pulling up their numbers now, down 15% year to date. I think the fewest murders, they have data back to early 2000. I think 2013 was the last time that they had. No, less than that. Sorry, I over. Yeah, so they have data back to 2007. They haven't had this few murders. I guess Philly was the 60s through June, so it's not surprising that they're at that level. In general, I think that they're seeing a smaller decline in shooting victims, like a 9% decline in shooting victims. But you're talking about Philly is the poster child for had huge decline in 2023, huge decline in 2024, and now another huge decline in 2025 after having seen a really enormous increase in 2020. I mean, when Philly went from like 366 murders to almost 600 murders in the span of a year, and now over the last 12 months is at 240 murders. So,
I mean, really fits in that. It fits in that larger trend that you're talking about. And it sounds like that's the case for all these seasons. Oftentimes you'll hear city officials, right, or state officials are going to try and portray the decrease as something specific they did to fix the problems in their that are happening locally. It sounds more like this is more of like a national story, that this is happening everywhere, right?
They're always right. It's always whatever the city did most recently that they want to credit. Oh, my lighting. So usually when you look at sort of like what's to credit for this, it's the ultimate example of failures in orphan, success has many fathers. That we know that there are lots of different factors that you have to use to explain it, and you look at and they don't fit easily on a left-right sort of political narrative. So
yeah, what are the factors that we need to, like, when you look at this decline, and this maybe even include the increase and then the decline? What are the things that you're seeing as far as the data goes that need to be explained if you're going to have a coherent view of why this has happened?
So first and foremost, it was national. the decline happened everywhere, as we've talked about for with the last 25 minutes on here. That it's something that it's not. We did something on the side of the street, and the patrol over here is the reason that crime is going down here. The best explanations are probably going to be the big national ones. Second, we know that policing, especially in big and medium-sized cities, there's fewer officers now than there were even 3 years ago when the decline started, to say nothing of 5 or 6 years ago when there were significantly fewer officers. New Orleans, where I am, had 1,200 officers in 2019. If you include officers and recruits. In 2022, I'm pulling up the numbers, when New Orleans had the nation's highest murder rate, it had about 975 officers. If you look in the summer of 2022, it had over 1,000 officers. In June 2022, which was the worst month for New Orleans in terms of murder since Hurricane Katrina. And then now the city has around 890 officers and 50 recruits. So, and that's a typical story of places we're seeing. So they've done it without more officers being added. You talk about the 90s, what changed, what helped. Adding officers is one of the things that a lot of departments. New Orleans fired their entire police force essentially in 1994 with a new police chief, when the city had 432 murders, highest murder rate ever recorded for a city that size, and fired half the department and then rehired them within 2 years, and then was sort of rode that wave down that everyone else was riding. So fewer officers. As I'm sure you're well aware, the country is still awash in guns. There's guns everywhere. There's, I think, fewer gun sales than there have been
right now. But there was a huge spike.
Right, and it's still high historically.
Mm-hmm.
It's still much higher than it was 10 years
and
ago.
There wasn't like some new national gun control. I mean, there was the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, but the only thing that really impacted was background checks for 18 to 20-year-olds and dating partner domestic violence misdemeanor convictions. So not necessarily something that's having a massive impact on this, perhaps. And otherwise, there wasn't a lot of change to our national gun laws, certainly.
Right, and they've even gotten looser thanks to Bruin. So
sure, in a lot of states.
Yeah. So it's not there. This isn't a gun control argument. There's not one to be made that we restricted guns and now murder's falling. This is not something that we're necessarily seeing fixing of the root causes of crime. Typically, you'll hear, especially on the left, in order to fix crime, we need to fix poverty and we need to fix education. And I'm all for fixing poverty and fixing education. Those were not prerequisites to the trends that we're seeing. And then we probably saw clearance rates rise last year based on kind of the state data that we're seeing, but it probably is roughly where it was in 2019. Not low by historical standards, not high by historical standards. And certainly you're not seeing some incredible surge in policing efficiency leading to a vast increase in offenders getting caught, leading to better deterrence or something like that. So those are, and finally it started in 2023. So if you want to point to the thing that started last August, or you want to point to something that's happening this year to explain this year's decline, you're probably overstating what happened this year, what's happening this year.
So, I mean, yeah, and some of the more partisan, I guess, explanations that you'll hear are perhaps things like, Joe Biden increased police funding after the backlash against the defund the police movement within the Democratic Party. They actually passed a federal law to give more grants to hire police, but it sounds like that goes back to the whole idea that we don't really have more police now than we did during the spike. And then Trump administration has pulled back on some of the oversight of some of these departments that they and their supporters believe was overzealous, and maybe that contributed to decrease in what people describe as the police pullback effect, where police are less inclined to go out and do policing because of fear of, being blamed or, unfairly targeted in incidents, right? That's the common argument you'll hear on the right oftentimes. But I mean, I don't know. What do you think of any of those explanations? Do they carry water? Is there maybe there's part of what's going on, or what are your thoughts?
I mean, again, I'm in New Orleans. I know we've railed against consent decrees. The consent decree is still happening here. The consent decrees that are sort of signed and in process it's not up to the Trump administration or the Department of Justice whether or not they continue. So it's not something that you can necessarily get out of. There are places that are getting out of future consent decrees, but you look at, and I think Memphis comes to mind there, but you look at Minneapolis, they're still going through with the consent decree, just without DOJ. I think Louisville is doing roughly the same thing. So this is something where even in places where the Department of Justice is not doing what they normally do, the police departments are still activating and they're still trying to reform the departments. And through January, we saw murder down a ton. It was very early. It's only a handful of murders, but in general, this trend did not start with the Trump administration. It didn't. So I don't think that, I'm a skeptic that anything that's happened this year is causing what's happening this year.
Okay.
To be my political answer.
And so, I mean, it just kind of sounds like some of the things that are commonly pointed to, have flaws. They don't explain all these factors that we're seeing. It wasn't a decline in red states or a decline in blue states only, right? This is a nationwide thing. Do you have a more preferred explanation for, what's going on here? I mean, I know we've talked in the past that basically nobody has a full understanding of, why the crime decline happened even in the 1990s, into the 2000s. Nobody has a perfect explanation for that. And so maybe we're not going to have a perfect explanation here, but I think you have some thoughts on this, right?
So my preferred explanation is that we started to spend a lot of money. And what that means is that starting in that 2021, 2022 timeframe, there was an enormous federal investment I call it a federal investment in communities. There was, you look at the data, something like a 50%, not adjusting for inflation, it's smaller if you adjust for inflation, but still pretty massive, 50% increase in state and local government, street and highway construction. There was I want to say a 70% increase in lighting, in terms of like street lighting and things like that. There was a 50% increase in the sort of overarching public safety construction from state and local governments. There was a 110% or so increase in neighborhood and social centers construction. And so, and then in addition, all of this money enabled cities to stabilize budgets, hire again. So you saw this enormous increase in local and state government hiring after this enormous decline at the sort of height of the pandemic as people got furloughed and funding was uncertain. And so we had all of this funding being spent. It has a couple of effects. One, it enables cities to start programming again. So we talked about the DOJ had an enormous increase in the grants that it was offering to communities for a whole host of issues. In New Orleans, a DOJ grant enabled them to start a program of community violence interrupters. They were able to pilot it in hospital settings, and then under that program, expand it to the community setting. And then because the city's budget had been stabilized with half of their rescue plan money going to stabilizing the city budget, they then expanded the program threefold using city money. So it enabled programming. The other thing is that if you spend money on streets, obviously it's creating construction jobs. It's also spending money on streets and lighting. We know that street lighting has an effect on crime. So if spending all of this money on fixing stuff, making it nicer, it also has this sort of unintended benefit of helping to lower crime. During the pandemic, obviously loneliness, isolationism was a huge issue for a lot of people. And you saw this construction of neighborhood centers and social centers. If you and I get into a fight, nobody's around. One of us is armed, and somehow it turns into a shooting, turns into a murder. There was nobody there to intervene. There was nobody there that could be a guardian that could stop us from making a stupid decision and turning sort of this simple assault into a murder. If you have people around, if you're building community environments where everybody can gather, then you start to see decreases in crime because of this ability of people to intervene, people to
Interesting.
in a position to stop a bad situation from becoming much, much worse. And so I think that all of this stuff, there's not one explanation. It's that we threw a bunch of slop against the wall, and some of it helped to reduce crime.
And some of it was beyond government action too, right? You're kind of describing there both like a return to normalcy of like just people being out in society for one, more frequently than they were, during the pandemic, even late pandemic period. And then also sort of, anti-blight measures and public safety infrastructure action, and then community interrupters. It's just sort of a mix of that stuff together. Perhaps is what we're seeing, at least parts of what we're seeing, it sounds like.
And as far as explaining, it helps explain why it was everywhere. It helps explain, it doesn't rely on taking away guns. It doesn't rely on fixing poverty. It doesn't rely on police suddenly, flipping the switch from off to on. It helps to, and it doesn't take away from anything that's happening, because all of this stuff is happening at a local level. It's cities and states running programming, and philanthropies and nonprofits and things like that, running programming and helping out their communities. It's just that the main driver here, the main push, is coming up from the federal government, and probably came up from the federal government 3 or 4 years ago.
Interesting. But obviously we don't have, concrete studies that back all this up, right? It's just more of a, here's what could be the explanation.
A gut explanation.
Yeah. Okay. So, obviously we want to take it with a grain of salt, but it's coming from somebody who studies this for a living and is, I think, the top source for crime data analytics in the country. So I think a worthwhile point of view to hear from, in my opinion. And I believe our listeners would agree with that. Speaking of which, where can people go to find more of your writing and maybe check out some of the new content that you guys are producing?
Yeah. So Jeffalytics is my podcast, jasher.substack.com. My podcast, my Substack. And if you want to check out our new YouTube channel, it's aggregated at aggregated_RTCI on YouTube. So we just started up, and we have a couple of videos up there. You can see me looking very uncomfortable on episode 0, trying to not look like a hostage while also reading the teleprompter. So hopefully I will improve at that. And we have an actor, our crime guru, Albert, who is fantastic and is recording all of the videos for us. So that's much better than me trying to do it.
Awesome. Well, I recommend people go and check that out. And I appreciate you coming on the show. We'll have to do this again. I still think this is one of the biggest stories out there. Doesn't get enough attention. So that's why I love that you're able to come on and give us updates and explain what's going on in the data, throughout the year. And so we'll have to see what, hopefully the trend continues, and we'll have good news at the end of the year as well.
Yep, hopefully.
That's all we've got for you guys this week. You can head over to reload.com to sign up for our free weekly newsletter, or to buy a membership if you like the reporting we're doing here. That's how we fund what we're doing. And of course, it'll also give you access to exclusive pieces of analysis and stories that you won't find anywhere else. And you'll get this podcast a day early as well. All right, that's all we've got for you guys, and we will see you again real soon.